Good morning and welcome to the Point. The Michigan State Legislature headed back to work after a couple of weeks back in district. And of course, the big thing on their plate right now is the budget. We talked to two members of the State House, one Democrat, one Republican, about what to expect, starting with Muskegon County Republican Holly Hughes. Representative, let's talk about the first quarter of this year. I saw a couple of stories, and I get it, sometimes reporters have to do stories, but a couple of them lamented the fact they didn't think a lot was getting done in the early going of this legislative process. You've been around this a while.
Yes.
Is it average, below average, above average?
Oh, somewhere in the middle.
Yeah?
I think, yeah. I think it's really going to heat up now that we're keying in on the budget. You know, we're going to be done by the end of May or first week of June, as we have been for the last 6 years. So you're going to see things rolling a little harder here in the next couple weeks.
When you talk about getting that budget done, that is something that was priority for this governor. And there are a lot of things that have changed. The economy of the state is a whole lot better than it was for his predecessor. He also has all the levers of government. He has Republicans in control in the House and in the Senate. But the budget process is still a difficult one because there is no unanimous vote when it comes to spending money, even among Republicans. We saw that earlier this year with a tax vote that would have rolled back the income tax to 3.9% from 4.25. It didn't pass, and some people were like, well, I think that was the perception that things weren't getting done. But that's a big bill to try to pass.
Well, I think we'll eventually get there with the tax cut. We cut the taxes from 4.35 to 4.25 in 2012. And then I had a bill on homestead tax credit that was increased for folks who needed that tax relief and so forth. So there's been a number of things that we've done. And I think eventually we'll do an income tax cut. Will it be that exact amount? I don't know. But in 12, it was our goal to go to 3.9. So,
well, but that represents about $1 billion, doesn't it? If you go back to 3.9, well, if you don't have anything to replace the revenue.
Right. Well, the thing of it is we've got a little bit of wiggle room. I think maybe we can do 1 or 2 years, but I don't think that we can go beyond that because the original bill was to eliminate eventually as you go down the decades, but I don't know that that's realistic. We only have $10 billion that we really, I say only, that's a lot of money, but it's been the same since 2007, and the rest of the budget is federal dollars. That's why I say only, because the vast majority of $54 billion budget is federal money. But I think that we can eventually take an income tax cut, but we've got to be conservative about it because we do have bills to pay. And that's part of being a conservative, not only with tax cuts, but paying your bills as well.
One of the things that's coming down the pike, and you can give me the timeline better, and I want to come back to that pie chart that talks about the budget in just a minute.
Yeah.
But one of the things that is coming down sooner rather than later will be considerable increased spending out of that same general fund for roads, $600 million. When does that kick in?
In a couple of years.
So if you're talking about a reduction of 10% or thereabouts and another increase of $600 million, now we're all of a sudden talking about a $1.6 billion difference in money coming in and going out?
Well, that's why I voted for the bill, because there was an amendment in there to adjust it if we didn't have the money to follow it. We're doing so well with the economy, as you pointed out, that I think that will continue to grow. Right now we're 100,000 jobs that we can't fill. We cut our unemployment in Muskegon in half. Our veterans unemployment went from 16.9% in 2012 to 3.2% last year. So we really need people moving back to help fill those jobs. And actually I've been working with Dave Lorenz, who is part of Travel Michigan. Dave comes before our committee a lot. I'm chair of tourism and outdoor recreation. And he's from Fruitport. And I asked him, are we going to do more ads like the Pure Michigan ads with Tim Allen? Only do it for jobs this time? And he said, yes, we are. And so they're working on that right now. They're working with some focus groups to see if we can entice people that have moved out of the state to remember how great Michigan is, and that we have jobs for you here. Please come on back. Or even those of you that are just looking for a job, come to Michigan because we have them for you here. Interestingly enough, we're not sure if it's going to be Tim Allen or somebody else, because Tim Allen appeals to our age group, because we remember tool time.
Right.
And every man standing is still around, so it does help a little bit, but there might be another marketing strategy in order to get people to move back and fill those jobs that we need. And that would bring more money to more taxpayers, actually, to help us with those.
So you're talking about expanding the tax base.
Absolutely, and you know the governor put in his State of the State address that he wants to increase our population by 72,000. He wants to hit that, I think it's 10 billion mark, and we need to go beyond that, actually. So
before we move off of this, when it comes to the $600 million for roads, how confident are you that that money is going to be there when the time comes?
Oh, we'll make sure it is there. We got an agreement a year ago, October, and it wasn't easy to do. As you know, it took a long, long time to do it, and we took half from existing and half from new, and we're committed to make sure that happens, because we need that infrastructure there for the job growth that we have, for manufacturers to attract people to our state. So we're committed to making sure the job gets done on roads.
Talk to me about tourism. You're chairing that committee, and that has a lot to do. We think of tourism, people coming and having a good time, but the reality is they're having a good time and they're leaving their money behind, which is an added benefit.
Yes. $7 billion, I think it is, for in the fishing industry, $7 billion, and $5 billion for staying overnight. But it's even more than that. They're not just here for sports, but they're for the beauty of our state, for the arts and culture that we have, and just plain old fun. And so that's a huge industry that we need to watch out for, and we're working hard on that.
What are some of the things that are happening specifically in your region? Because when you think about the West Coast and what we've seen happen in Muskegon County and along that coastline has been a pretty dramatic shift over the past few years, with some iconic buildings that may have not been the most tourist friendly going away and reclaiming some of that, and the Deepwater Port.
Right. Sappi has been leveled, and the Pure Muskegon guys are committed to making that a destination spot. The stacks will come down soon. Downtown Muskegon's been a great change there, with the farmers market attracting some crazy number like 12 or 15,000 people.
It's big.
On
It's
a weekend.
a huge facility. If you haven't seen it,
It's
really
beautiful.
something, yeah.
It's beautiful. And they have cooking classes there and all kinds of things. And then, you know, Consumers Energy is trying to sell their property at the end because they decommissioned that plant. So you're going to see a bunch of more changes coming along. And you see, you know, 18th Amendment, different breweries downtown expanding. I think the 18th Amendment opens up in April. So there's a lot of things happening. And then the state park, they're expanding too with their zip lines that you can see Lake Michigan from, and that's a lot of fun. Besides the luge, you can do the luge in the summer too, not just in the winter. I've done both.
You just got the attention of an 8-year-old in the Albin house when you said zip lines. Let's talk about something else that you've been doing for a long time, and the paradigm has switched in such a dramatic way that it's a fun story to tell. Years ago, you partnered with a bunch of the folks who are taking care of Veterans Affairs in Muskegon County and said, look, we have this, you referenced a moment ago, very high level of unemployment among veterans. You came up with a jobs fair. At the time, it was really a dramatic need for folks who had served in the military. Talk to me a little bit about how that started, when it started, what it looked like then, what does it look like today, because it's coming up again.
Oh, dramatically different. We started it 5 years ago. This year will be our 6th annual Veterans Job Fair on May 23rd. It's a Tuesday, but this time we're having it at the LC Walker Arena, bigger venue.
Used to be out on the old landing vehicle, the LST.
Yeah, on the LST. But we'll have we've got 63 businesses there right now. That are coming, have committed, and we know we'll get more. We always do towards the end, because there's people that wait till the end because they're not sure if they're going to need employees or not, and we think that they will. So I think we'll probably have at least 80. We'll see how that works out. But 5 years ago, I went to Dave Ealing when we had almost 17% unemployment for our veterans.
Dave Ealing is head of Veterans Affairs in
Head
Muskegon
of
County.
Veterans Affairs in Muskegon, and I said, Dave, we should do a Veterans Job Fair. And he goes, oh, I've always wanted to do it. We'll do this on the ship. So we did. And since then, we partnered with Goodwill and Volunteers of America. Mike Bow has joined us as well. They're working very hard to make sure that we have the 80 or so more businesses in place. But 5 years ago, people were looking for work. Now work's looking for people. And I talked to Bill Seifert a couple months ago from the Eagle Group, and he had said that they had hired 12 people and they didn't show up the next week. So you've got to have people that are going to show up that can pass the drug test. He was trying to recruit people from Wisconsin to come over, and some executives and different folks to work in the plant that used to live in Michigan. But right now what's happening, and we see that with our company, MasterTag, is you have a trading going on right now among current employers, not just in Muskegon, but all across the state. So the difference, is huge. Now we need the people. There's 100,000 jobs out there, as I said before. We really need to attract people to come back to Michigan. We need you here to help out in our hometown, and what a better place to live and grow up than right here.
We've got a couple of minutes left, and I want to talk just a little bit about that. Obviously, this jobs fair is not just for veterans. Anybody can go to this.
Everybody.
And you've moved it over into the arena, so you'll have a lot more space, and I assume you're expecting a lot more vendors and people to come in there. But here is the problem that you face as a legislator, and we all face as Michiganders. 10 years ago, sitting at this table, we weren't talking about things about revitalization of tourism industries or people finding jobs. We were just trying to figure out how we were going to balance a budget and keep our head above water to stay.
Right.
Now, less than a decade later, we're in this very favorable situation. So how do you convince that person that's in Kentucky or Tennessee or Texas or Florida or Georgia or Wisconsin, as you mentioned a moment ago, that this time we're back to stay and we're not going to go through that boom and bust again? Because remember how much the Governor Snyder talked about that during his first race for governor of Michigan, because it's something we've seen on a regular basis.
Well, I think if you talk to industry, the car industry, other industries, in fact, we have a switch here now that we didn't have before, that's supposed to be expanding leaps over bounds and so forth. We have other industries that are expanding that way too. It's not just one industry. And so there's plenty of jobs here. I think that will continue. We have the medical mile here in Grand Rapids, but it's also expanding in Muskegon. We have $270 million expansion at Mercy Hospital in Muskegon that's happening right now. In fact, at our job fair, we've got not only nursing jobs available, but executive medical positions. We've got aeronautic positions at Arconic, which was Alcoa Howmet. I got to remember saying that. They changed their name. But GE Aviation, we've got law enforcement, Meyer, DTE Energy, manufacturing, Peterson Farms. There's all kinds of jobs for all kinds of different people.
Right, and so
you could even advance to your career into more money or a new position because they're out there and the companies want you.
When we come back, a view from the other side of the aisle. That's next. To the Point. Welcome back to The Point. This morning we're talking with two members of the State House of Representatives. They're back to work in Lansing, and they'll be looking at the budget very closely, including Appropriations member Democrat David LaGrand from Grand Rapids. Representative, let's talk about the first quarter of the year as you head back to work this week. You've been in the district talking to constituents and doing things here. Give me a grade on that first 3 months. Was it about what you expected or a little slow?
No, I mean, it's interesting to see. I think what we've seen at the federal level is sort of what we've seen at the state level, which is some real divisions inside the Republicans, and that, from a Democratic standpoint, is not all that bad. So there are some moderate Republicans who are, I think, fiscally conservative, who really balked at the idea of slashing our income tax revenues without any clear plan for how you deal with that in a budgetary process. And so that meant that didn't happen. And that meant that 12 Republicans voted with Democrats against that proposal. So that was sort of a surprising victory. It took us till 3 in the morning, and it was a real bipartisan response to, I think, not a very fiscally well thought out initiative. So that was the big interesting thing in the first quarter. Other than that, laying the groundwork for some things that I'm hoping to do in the next 6 months.
And we're going to talk about some of those, but I want to get a better sense for what that vote on taxes meant, because does that leave those 12 Republicans on an island? Are they for the rest of this session going to be working outside of that bigger caucus group, or was this just an individual vote?
Well, I guess the first thing I'd say is if that's an island, we'd be happy to have them join our continent. They're all good, thoughtful people, and I'm really impressed with their ability to do what is not easy to do, which is to stand aside from your caucus, do an analysis, and focus in on good policy. Not easy to do. If we had a parliamentary system, I had a Canadian friend who said, well, why don't they just cross the aisle? And I said, well, we don't really do that in America.
That's not the way that works, right?
It'd be nice for us, all of a sudden we'd have the majority, but I can't speak to that. I mean, they didn't wake up in the morning and decide they're not Republicans. I assume that they have philosophical, broader commitments that make them continue to feel like they're Republicans. But I think there are, and I don't mean to criticize you as a member of the media, but I think that often the problem with media reporting is conflict sells. If somebody has a fight, that's an interesting story. If people are getting along, it's not a great story. So where I'm going with that is, I think about 80% of what we do in Lansing is really a collaborative effort, and good policy is good policy. And I've had a lot of, one of the big surprises for me coming in out of this, at this from the outside and being a relatively new rep, is how much real good collaborative work gets done.
Well, and to that point, and I tend to agree with you. On the other hand, the things that you, as Democrats and Republicans, disagree about are the big things. For example, the Freedom of Information Act bills that went through the House again this year, I think passed 108 to nothing. There were a group of 10, was it 100?
Sounds right.
Yes, in that
Yeah.
neighborhood. It's important legislation, something people feel very passionately about, may or may not get taken up at the other end. However, the budget, which is the next thing that's coming up, is where we will see a lot of division because Republicans and Democrats don't always see eye to eye on spending.
Yeah, okay, so let me put that, let me push back on that a little bit. The budget is about money. And at the end of the day, there's a lot more important things in the world than money. What I tend to think is that the role of government is human flourishing. And so when I look at what the government does, the single most profound thing that the government tends to do in people's lives is incarcerate them. And there is real bipartisan discussion going on right now about criminal justice reform. We've had decades of incarcerating more and more and more people. Michigan has about twice the length of stay of any other state in our prison system. And we're a real outlier there, but in the country as a whole, we've multiplied the number of people we have in prison by about fivefold. Everybody, Republicans and Democrats, are looking at it and saying, wait a minute, this is a bad trend. We can't afford this. It's not really producing public safety, so we need to re-examine that. That's profound, important stuff, and that's bipartisan. Now, when you say we'll have fights, well, sure, we'll have discussions, and I will say, for example, that I don't think we're spending enough on roads, and we're not being honest about how much money should be spent on roads. And somebody on the other side of the aisle might want to look at the numbers and say, hey, look, there's an extra $100 million, let's quick have a tax break. Whereas I look down the road and I say, we've got a structural infrastructure problem. Because you got 10 cents in the bank now doesn't mean you give away $3. We've got to have a, when I was on City Commission, the City of Grand Rapids has a 5-year rolling budget, and that means you're always looking 5 years down the road. The state has historically done a 1-year budget. They do this budget, and then they sort of say, oh, let's do it again next year. And some of the agencies are coming along and projecting. I mean, MDOT projects. They know what our roads are going to look like in 10 years. But I was at a presentation last year when I was on the Roads Commission, where they said, 10 years, roads are going to decay from about 85% good and fair to about 50% good and fair on any calculation you've got on the funding mechanisms that are in place. Well, you look at that and you think, we got to have a 10-year plan. We can't just have a 1-year plan on roads, and we can't act as though this is fixed, because it's not.
Well, and there would be some people, and here's another place where Republicans and Democrats have a division, because
Sure.
Republicans said they came up with a road plan last year. They said that there'll be, between the two forms of money, the two sources of money, $1.2 billion at the end of this trail, which is still a couple of years down the road, but $600 million of that comes out of the general fund. And if you cut taxes, then the general fund is what gets taxed. How confident are you that $600 million is going to be there when it comes time to pay up?
Not very. And frankly, that's one of the reasons why I'm urgent that we do criminal justice reform, because that's somewhere where we can save money. It costs us more than $30,000 a year to incarcerate people, and if you and I spend money, we want to see a result for our money. If we buy a car, the car better work. Well, we're buying a system of public safety which isn't giving us results for our money. So if incarcerating 60,000 people, which is about how many we have incarcerated in Michigan right now, doesn't give us a public policy benefit, but costs us about, it depends on how you want to look at it, but $2, $3, $4, maybe even $6 billion a year if you look at all the costs involved. That's a lousy investment. So I look at this from a business background, and I think, okay, if I'm going to spend this money, show me what it's good for.
Well, and you say that Republicans, Democrats, people all over are looking at this, and that's exactly so, because in the 80s, there was a real push for truth in sentencing, locking people up, making sure they served the amount of time that they were sentenced to, and a real crackdown. I mean, and that happened across the state lines, and legislatures all over the place did it, and now there's become a big price tag. I very often hear people who are looking at criminal justice reform say we've got to decide who we're afraid of and who we're mad at.
Right.
And that's part of it.
Yep.
But part of it also is coming to that point where you can say we're protecting public safety and maybe doing some other good, because there are a whole lot of people that are in the criminal justice system that probably would be better served being dealt with in some type of mental health capacity.
That's true. I mean, I think at the end of the day, what we have to focus on is the question of recidivism. In other words, when people come out, do we have a good experience as a society when those people come back out? And if 50-70% of the people who are coming out of prisons are reoffending, that means you haven't dealt with any of the underlying issues. You haven't given them a reasonable path to returning to society. And certainly it's true that I saw a study once that said 60% of the people who are incarcerated either have a mental health issue or a substance abuse issue or both. Well, that means drug courts are a good idea. Mental health courts are a good idea. And there are a lot of people who unfortunately are in our society now have a mental health issue, which we know is going to be with them for the rest of their life. What they need is a good plan. They need people to check in on them. They need people to monitor their behavior, and they need some consequences if they stop taking their meds or stop complying. But we have to have a plan that gives us success as a society, and that means we have to look at. It's too bad because we often tend to think in anecdotes. We need to start thinking in statistics. We need to look at broad outcomes and say, is that the broad societal outcome we want? Not Bob Smith did one bad thing once and that proves the program's bad. We've got a program right now which is called Prison, which is a horrible outcome system. So anything we can do that's better than the kind of recidivism numbers we get out of prison would be good.
One thing you were talking about just before we started, and I'm not acquainted with criminal justice system in any way to know this, and I was surprised to hear you say that, if I get this right, if I mess it up, you'll correct me, but on the federal level, for the most part, it's not a cash bond system. You were explaining that they do an assessment, but most states, you say, do a cash bond system. Tell me what that means to you as you have observed.
Sure. Well, and you know, Rick, I represent the 75th, which is the core of Grand Rapids, and there's a lot of poverty in my district. And there was a study recently that said something like 44% of Americans have no idea where they'd get $500 from if they had a $500 problem in their life. Their car blows up, they can't do anything about it. So a lot of people are really living on the edge of their finances. Well, if you take somebody who can't find $500 and you set a $1,000 bond for them, they wind up staying in jail, not because they're innocent or guilty, but they've been charged. But if you set a $1,000 bond for them, they can't get out. Now, think about what happens to somebody like that. You set a $1,000 bond, they can't make the bond. Within 2 days, maybe CPS is coming and taking their kids away. Within 4 days, they've probably lost their job, and within a couple weeks, they've lost their housing. All of those are disruptive events for employers. They're governmental costs, and they're bad for landlords, and they're certainly bad for the people it happened to. And remember, it's got nothing to do with guilt or innocence. If you or I had to come up with a $1,000 bond, we could do it. You can come back to work, you can interview people, but if you can't make a $1,000 bond, all of a sudden you're locked up. So we've got about 8,000 people in Michigan right now as we speak who are in jail because they can't afford to bond out. Now that makes no sense. What we should be doing is assessing whether they're a risk to the community and whether they're a flight risk. And if anyone is a flight risk or a risk to the community, then they should be lodged. But if neither of those are true, then why aren't they able to go out and keep their employer happy, keep their job, keep their family in shape? And so we've got thousands of people who are sort of being penalized for poverty.
And that is something that you will address in legislation that you have put together. Do you have a sense yet if there's a bipartisan consensus on that, or is that just something you're going to have to build?
You know, it's one of those things that where people sort of feel like, well, we've always done it this way. And so I'm having a lot of conversations with colleagues who just don't know. They don't know that there's any other possibility. So in the federal system, as you mentioned, there isn't a cash component to bond. You get assessed for risk, and if you're not a risk, by and large, you get out. the District of Columbia, they basically don't use a cash bond system. They largely got rid of it in Maryland recently. They're talking about getting rid of it in Illinois and New Jersey. But most states have a cash bond system. And so for your and my life, it's normal. You know, somebody gets a drunk driving, they have to post a bond. Somebody commits a shoplifting offense, they have to post a bond. Or again, are charged. Someone's charged with whatever, they have to post a bond. And so we sort of think, why should you change that? And once you point out to people how many people's lives are impacted by this, and then it's really just a question of poor or rich. A rich, dangerous person can get out under our current system, whereas a poor, non-dangerous person can't. And once you explain that we've basically confused liquidity and liberty, then people's eyes are open and they sort of get it.
We're back in just a moment. To the point. We're completely out of time this morning. Our guest next week will be Congressman Fred Upton. I hope you'll join us Sunday morning at 10 o'clock on Wood TV 8 for To the Point.